John Wick 3 Parabellum just had a $57 million opening weekend, which is the 178th biggest opening weekend ever. When we compare what it's currently got in the box office to the original John Wick and John Wick Chapter 2, we can see here in this chart, it's absolutely smashed the total domestic box office that John Wick got for its entire run, and it's really on its way to easily beat the John Wick Chapter 2 title. So what else can we compare it to that'll be interesting other than it's just going to beat John Wick 1 and 2? Well, if we go back to the opening weekends and look for some other films with similar opening weekends, we can see just about the best one with this kind of opening weekend was Despicable Me. So they got $251 million, so that's really the high water mark, where I don't think it'll get that much money, but that's possible with this kind of opening weekend. And we've got a few around the high 100s, like 180, 190. There's a couple over 200, so that looks like this kind of better range. 150 is probably a safe bet. It should be able to get at least 3 times the kind of money it's got right now. We can see Valentine's Day there, $110 million. So that's kind of range that we actually have that's possible with a $57 million opening weekend. So in this chart here, I've got a range of different films with very similar opening weekends, but quite a different outcome at the end. So we've got Mission Impossible 2, we have Ant-Man. I've put Shazam in because it is currently still in the movies, and it's good to get a little update on what actually happened with Shazam. We've got Watchmen, we've got Pokemon Detective Pikachu. Again, it's currently in the films right now, just to see where it currently lines up. And we have John Wick Chapter 3 Parabellum in the light blue color. Now, it's very hard to tell looking at the little starting bit. All the lines are all overlapped, but the worst film at this stage was Mission Impossible 2, which actually went on to be the best film. And the actual best film at this stage, I think, is Ant-Man by a very small margin, and then it's actually John Wick Chapter 3. So John Wick Chapter 3 and Ant-Man right now are in line with each other with the Monday box offices, and Mission Impossible 2 is doing the worst, but we can see very clearly it doesn't end up the worst. Watchmen is by far the worst film here. And if we look at the yellow and the purple lines, we can see that Detective Pikachu is basically on top of Shazam. It's getting the exact same box office right now. So that's interesting to see where those two actually line up. They've been in a dead heat, or very close to a dead heat, in their box office runs so far. And here are the raw numbers here for Mission Impossible 2 on the left, Ant-Man on the right, and John Wick 3 Parabellum down the bottom. I picked Mission Impossible 2 as the best film with a similar opening because it opened about a week after where John Wick is. Now, it isn't a completely different year, but about a week different, so I thought maybe it would line up quite well being in a similar time of the year, but it's actually completely different, and it's not a very good lineup at all. If we look at the top, the May 24th, that's actually a Wednesday. So they had a Wednesday open, then they got $8 million for the Thursday, and then it had 16 for the Friday, then it got 21 for the Saturday, then it got 18 for the Sunday, and then the May 29th, that's a Memorial Day weekend, so it got $12 million on the Monday. So that complete start of it is not going to line up anything like what we get for John Wick. And if we quickly go back to the chart, we can see that's what happened with the dark blue line here. So it didn't have a very good open because it didn't open on a Friday. So it was a bit worse on the Wednesday and the Thursday. That's why it's in last place here. But then later on, it gets the Friday, Saturday, and Sunday, and it gets a Monday holiday, and that's why it just shoots through all of the other films. And then after that, it gets a bit more of a normal trajectory. But at that point in time, I think it's over $20 million in front of Ant-Man. So it's already ahead, and it just keeps staying ahead after that point. And back onto the raw numbers, if we look across at Ant-Man now, the one on the right-hand side, and compare that with John Wick's numbers, the one down the bottom, if we look in the total gross columns, we can see it had $22 million, then 42, then 57. So Ant-Man had a $57 million opening weekend, and if we compare that to the third total gross number for the bottom figure here, for the John Wick, we have $56.8 million. So very similar there, 56.8, 57.2, very, very close. If we then look at the Monday, we've got $6.4 million for Ant-Man's Monday, whereas we've only got $5.7 million for John Wick's Monday. So it's very early to read too much into it, but at this stage it looks just to be a little bit weaker than Ant-Man, and so it'll probably earn a bit less than what Ant-Man earned in the US domestic market. Now, anything can change from this point, obviously, but just at this very early stage, that's what we're kind of looking at. We're probably looking at something around about or underneath what Ant-Man actually got. Another thing to keep in mind is that John Wick 3 is an R-rated film, so you've got obviously a smaller audience that can actually go see it. If we just look at some R-rated films instead of looking at all of the films, here are the actual opening records in the US domestic market for R-rated films. And so it is the 17th biggest open ever for an R-rated film in the US domestic market without inflation, slightly above Watchmen, and we can see how bad Watchmen actually went. It only got $107 million in total, so that is possible for John Wick. I don't think that that will happen, but that is a possible target we could get with this kind of opening weekend. It could get only $107 million. At the very top, we have Deadpool in the number 1 place, $132 million. But if you look up just a little bit from John Wick at number 15, we have 22 Jump Street. It's got a fairly decent box office with still a similar kind of opening weekend, a little bit better, but it got $191 million with the $57 million open weekend. And if we look at this list here, we have the total grosses without inflation for the US domestic market for R-rated films. So at the top, we have The Passion of the Christ with $370 million. I think that's way out of reach for John Wick 3 Parabellum. But if you look down at the bottom here, number 27, we have The Matrix with $171 million. So I think that's quite an interesting comparison to make. Can the Keanu Reeves The Matrix actually earn less money than what the Keanu Reeves John Wick 3 will actually earn in the US domestic market? Now, we're obviously dealing without inflation here. The 171 will go up by quite a lot, and I think there's no way at all that John Wick 3 Parabellum would earn more money with inflation than The Matrix, but without inflation, it's quite an interesting comparison to make. Can it actually get $171 million? And if we create another chart here, and I've got The Matrix on here and John Wick 3 Parabellum, I've also put on 22 Jump Street, which was a film that had a very similar open to John Wick 3. It was about $2 million different. You can see here on the chart here, they line up quite well so far down to the Monday. So this is just the Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, obviously so far for John Wick 3. And we can see the yellow line is pretty much on top of the blue 22 Jump Street line. And obviously the blue line is above The Matrix, so 22 Jump Street did earn more money than The Matrix. So it's not outlandish at this very early stage to say this is possible. It is possible that John Wick 3 can actually earn more money than The Matrix. Again, we're not talking about inflation, no inflation here, but just looking at this, again, very, very, very early lineup, if it keeps track with 22 Jump Street, or even does a bit worse than 22 Jump Street, it will beat The Matrix, which I don't think anyone would have really predicted beforehand, that it would be possible for John Wick 3 to actually earn more money than The Matrix. The Matrix Reloaded earned more money than The Matrix without inflation, so if this does happen, if John Wick 3 Parabellum does earn more money than The Matrix, it will not be the number 1 Keanu Reeves film of all time, that would still be The Matrix Reloaded. Thanks for listening, and I'll catch you next time.